because they're going to be victorious and the Roman Empire is going to be defeated and overthrown. We noted that it's written in apocalyptic language. Basically, it's a picture book. And John's going to get these images, he's going to get these visions, he's going to see these signs that are going to let the people of God know what's going on. And the language that's used and the allusions that are used to the Old Testament, they're going to be able to pick that up and they're going to be able to get that. They're going to be able to understand that. But the Romans, if they were to pick it up, it's not going to be clear to them because just imagine, if you will, that the Christians are already being persecuted by the Roman government. And if they were walking around carrying a book talking about the downfall of the Roman Empire, how well do you think that would have went for them? Not very good, right? And so the book's sort of written in code. And as we look at it, we want to get the overall theme of the pictures that are in the book rather than getting lost in the minutia of trying to figure out, okay, what does everything in the picture stand for? What does everything in the picture mean? Just get the message that the picture is sending us, and that's kind of the intention of it. We left off last week. We were talking about the potential dates for when the book was written, and generally speaking, there are two dates that are talked about. And if you, depending on whose commentaries you pick up or whose material you look at, one date is that the book was written in 69 A.D. 69 A.D. would be during the reign of, or right after the reign of Nero, I suppose. And there's really no evidence to support that because it doesn't appear that the temple is still standing when we look at the book of Revelation. It looks like that 69 date is probably too early. Um, there's no demand upon the Christians to worship Nero as a deity. And there certainly was persecution that took place under Nero. Um, Nero burned the slums down in Rome and blamed it on the Christians. And while everyone knew that the Christians weren't responsible for that, it allowed him an avenue, if you will, to persecute the Christians there. And but it was limited. It was basically his persecution of the Christians was limited to the area of Rome. It didn't spread throughout the whole empire. And Nero didn't really demand to be worshipped as a deity. And so there are things that are in the book of Revelation that just don't seem to fit Nero. They don't seem to fit that particular time period. Some of the things that we see that are going on with the various churches, the seven letters that are written with regards to the Nicolaitans, and Ephesus has lost their first love. 69 might be a little early for the condition of the churches that we see that are listed in those seven letters that are written to the churches in the first couple of chapters there. And so it doesn't seem to fit that particular date. Some folks want to try to say, well, this is talking about Nero, and Nero's the beast that's being spoken of. Because if you take the letters in Nero's name in Hebrew, right? So if you translate Nero's name into Hebrew and then take the numbers of those letters in Hebrew and add them up, they say that they add up to 666. Well, that's trying to get a literal number, right, off of a person's name to say that this is talking about Nero. But the numbers, and we're going to talk about this some this morning, the numbers are used symbolically. And so that number 666, it could be symbolically with regards to Nero's name, but it's most likely in reference to something else instead. And so, as I said, there's no universal persecution of Christians under Nero. Now, while Nero is emperor, it appears that Paul dies, that he's executed under Nero, that Peter and his wife, according to legend, died during the reign of Nero. And so, as part of that persecution there, um, but the problem that Christianity has by and large in the Roman Empire, aside from emperor worship, is this. In the Roman Empire, it was illegal to start a new religion. If you started a new religion, it was considered to be an illicit religion. It wasn't a bona fide religion. It wasn't an approved religion. And so the basic problem that Christians have is that, well, while it looked like they were a sect of the Jews and Judaism was already in place when they conquered Palestine, Judaism is, even though the Romans don't like them, Judaism is an accepted religion, if you will. The Christians Well, when they looked like they were a sect of Jews, Rome didn't really bother them too much. But when it becomes clear that they're not a sect of the Jews, that this is something new, that this is something different, well, then Christianity, once it's separated from Judaism, isn't considered to be a legal religion. That's what makes what Constantine does in 315 a big deal, because he basically legalizes Christianity, makes it the religion of the empire, if you will. Christianity had kind of gotten watered down by the time we get to Constantine in 300, but you get the picture that it was an illegal religion, and that created a lot of problems for them. So some folks think that it was written in 69. 69 seems to be too early. Other commentaries that you'll read will say, well, it was written in 96 because it's dealing with Domitian, and Domitian's the one who really ramped up the persecution against Christians. Domitian's the one who wanted to be recognized as a deity and wanted to be worshipped as a god. And so they say that 96 then is the date because it fits this Domitian time period. Well, it certainly works with regards to what's going on in the book of Revelation. I think the book of Revelation is talking about what's going to happen when Domitian is ruling. Um, but let's take a look at the emperors that are here and with regards to this. If I could, Michael, would you help me pass these out? When we look at the time period that we're dealing with here in the Roman Empire, it's going to be important to help us understand what's going on and why the book is written and who the book is referring to, and hopefully that helps us to kind of pinpoint a date for it as well. It does look like it's being written about the time that Domitian is in power, that Domitian is the emperor, that is the beast of the sea that is mentioned later on in the book of Revelation, beginning in chapter 13. But it was the book written during Domitian's reign. That becomes the question. And those of you that were here last week, if you remember, we talked about while it's a book of apocalyptic writing, it's also called a book of prophecy. What is prophecy? Something that's going to happen in the future, right? So if you look at our sheet, you see Domitian is there. He's number 8. He's the second number 8, and I'll explain why that is. But he's the second number 8 on the sheet there. Domitian is, and his reign is from 81 to 96 A.D. So if the book is written in 96 A.D. to warn the Christians that Domitian is coming, seems like that's too late, doesn't it? That'd be kind of hard for that to be penned in 96 to say you got to watch out for this guy who's coming, who's going to persecute you, because he's already just about at an end in 96 AD. So if you take a look there at the emperors, you got Augustus is the first one, beginning in 27 BC. Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero reigns until 68, and then you got Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, I guess. You got the 1 year of 3 emperors, or actually, I guess in 1 year you've almost got 4 emperors with Nero, and then Vespasian comes in, and Titus, his son, and Domitian, who is also a brother of Titus, comes in there in 81 AD. And so you've got this list of emperors that are here. Well, let's take a look at what the book has to say in Revelation chapter 17. Because again, if the book identifies for us what's going on, right? If it says that these horns are kings, when we look at the beast that comes out of the sea and it's got these horns, right? And if the book tells us that the horns represent kings, then we understand what it is that he's talking about. We don't have to worry about, well, what are those horns about? Because it identifies it for us, right? Revelation chapter 17 and verse 8, it says, "The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is." And so notice the tense, the verb tense that's here, right? So they saw a beast who was and is not. When Domitian comes on the scene, people are going to think Nero's back, because Nero was crazy. And when they see some of the things that Domitian is demanding, they're going to think, well, this is Nero reincarnated, right? And that's kind of the idea here, the beast that was and is not. Well, he was, right? He was Nero, and Nero was crazy. And when Domitian comes along, he's got a screw loose too, if you will. And they think, well, this is Nero who has come back. But notice also the verb tense. It says, the beast that you saw will ascend out of the bottomless pit. So as the writer is writing this, he's saying, this guy is coming. He will ascend out of the pit, right? It gives them the picture that he's in league with hell, right? That he's coming up out of the pit of hell. And so, but he will. And so the writer's using future tense there. And so even though it's apocalyptic language, I think the tense still matters, that he says, well, this guy's coming, right? It looks like he's not here yet. So it would have to be before Domitian reigns that the book is being written. But he says, here's the beast who was and is not and yet is. In verse 9, he says, here is the mind which has wisdom, right? So here he's going to explain it to us, right? Here's the mind that has wisdom. You want to understand this? The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Rome was a city built on 7 hills. Right? So the harlot, it's a harlot's identified here, right? The harlot is the woman that sits on these 7 mountains, right? There are also 7 kings. Look at verse 10. There are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. So you've got these kings that are mentioned here, and as John is writing this, he says the 5 have already fallen. Well, that would take us through Nero if we're really talking about the Roman emperors. If these are the kings that we're talking about, and it appears that this matches up really well with what's going on in Revelation. It appears that he's talking about 5 were, right, but 5 have fallen. 1 now is, which appears would be Vespasian, and I'm going to explain why those other 3 don't count in just a moment. So it would appear that Vespasian is, right? 1 is. Another one is going to come shortly, and when he comes, he's going to continue for a short time. That looks like it's talking about Titus, who's only going to reign about 2 years. And then the 8th guy is the one you really got to be watching out for. The 8th guy is the one who's going to persecute you. The 8th one is the one that is the one that's going to perdition, right? He's the beast, right? That is being spoken of here in the book. Now let's back up to chapter 13. Any comments or questions so far? I know if you haven't seen this before, it can be complicated. In Revelation chapter 13, verses 3 through 5, as he sees this beast, right, he said, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. And so here it identifies for us that when we're looking at, it looks like one of the heads have been mortally wounded, right? And that's the idea that Nero is back, that the Romans had that idea when Domitian comes along, that this is Nero reincarnated. Just like Herod thinks that, well, Jesus is John the Baptist, right? Come back to haunt him because he's beheaded him. And so they believed in this, and they thought, well, this is what's going on here. This head that was and isn't, this, again, talking about Domitian, because it looks like Nero has returned. Let's go and look at Daniel, because Daniel chapter 7 speaks about this as well. I remember Daniel and his visions that he has, he's told to seal these things up because they're a long time off, right? And so we see something that Daniel's writing here somewhere around, maybe 540 BC, that's going to take place 500 years later. And he says, well, it's a long time off, so you seal that up, which is important when we look at the book of Revelation, because John's told these things are going to shortly come to pass, right? Don't seal this up. These things are going to shortly come to pass. So the book can't be writing about things that are 2,000 years in the future. right? If it's don't seal it up because it's going to come to pass, and Daniel seal it up because it's a long ways off, and Daniel's long ways off is 500 years, then the book of Revelation can't be talking about things in our, right, by and large, in our lifetime. Most of the book is dealing with the downfall of the Roman Empire. So in Daniel 7, notice verses 7 and 8. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. So notice you got the same thing in Revelation chapter 13 that's here in Daniel chapter 7, talking about these horns. Horns represented power, horns represented authority. And so this is a person who has authority, and he's the 11th one, but he says there were 3 that were plucked out by the roots. And so rather than 11, he becomes 8. So here in Daniel, you've got 10 of these horns, but it says 3 of them are plucked out. Well, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, they were illegitimate. They were trying to usurp power. After Nero commits suicide, they're trying to take on, and so you see they don't last for very long, right? They don't rule for very, because there's chaos until Vespasian is asked by the Senate to come in and to put this chaos to rest, and then Vespasian becomes emperor. And so those 3 really don't count, even though you would say, well, there's 10, and then Domitian's the 11th here, according to Daniel 7, but there's 7, and then Domitian is the 8th in the book of Revelation. Does that make sense? Even if it doesn't make sense, do you see where I'm coming from?
Just a little fast, that's all.
Yeah, I'm from the north. It shows sometime in how I talk, a little fast. I got to slow it down some. So the 4th beast, right? In the book of Daniel, you've got these beasts that are representative of kingdoms, and Daniel makes it clear that that's the case, that you've got, Babylon is the first of those, the Medes and the Persians are the second of those, Greece is the third, and then he spends most of the time talking about the 4th one, right? Doesn't spend a lot of time talking about those first 3, but spends a lot of time talking about that 4th beast, because that 4th beast, that 4th kingdom, well, that's when God's going to establish his kingdom. That's when God's going to establish the church. And you see that in Daniel chapter 2, you see it here in Daniel chapter 7. Notice over in verses 11 and 12 of Daniel 7, I watched then, because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, I watched until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And so he sees this beast, right? This man who's speaking these pompous words, and he's taken out of the way and he's thrown into what? Burning fire, right? He's thrown into burning fire. What happens to the beast of the sea in the book of Revelation? He's destroyed. He's thrown into what? Lake that burns with fire and brimstone, right? So this is talking about the same thing back here in Daniel that's being spoken of in Revelation. Talking about these kings that are going to come and that he's going to be defeated, right? He's basically a minion of Satan, and he's going to be defeated, but he's the one who's going to persecute the Christians. And so the book of Revelation looks to be written about what's going to happen under Domitian from 81 to 96. But it appears to be written in this time period when Vespasian is ruling. And Vespasian, you can see his dates on there are from 69 to 79. Now, I don't believe it was written in 69 because I don't think it was written before the destruction of the temple, because you don't have anything that references the destruction of the temple in Revelation. So it looks to have been written after that time period. I would guess it's probably late in Vespasian's reign, because there's one who now is, there's another who's coming shortly, right? And he's going to reign for a short time. That's Titus. And then there's the one that you have to worry about. Any comments or questions on these things? We're just kind of laying the groundwork. We're going to see this more when we get into the book itself, but just kind of laying the groundwork for where this is and when it was written. Vespasian and his son Titus seem to be fairly decent men from as far as Roman emperors go. There's a lot of bad emperors, but they seem to be all right. Vespasian is the one who rules during the Jewish uprising and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Titus is the general that leads the Roman army in destroying Jerusalem and in destroying the temple. But in Josephus's history, Titus was reluctant to destroy the temple. He was reluctant to have his soldiers go in there. But the Jews insisted on holding up in there and fighting against the Romans till the last breath, I guess. And so he eventually gives the order to go in there and get it and take them out. So Titus is the general who destroys the temple. He went looking for the ark. Apparently knew something about the Ark of the Covenant. Went looking, but there was nothing in whatever happened to the Ark of the Covenant. It wasn't in there when Titus went in there with the Roman soldiers to find it. History doesn't tell us what happened to it. Whether or not it's in a warehouse somewhere in Washington D.C. in a numbered crate, I am not at liberty to confirm or deny those rumors. Um, but maybe top men are looking at it. Nobody knows what happened to it. It's just, and I suppose if it was still around, people would want to worship that, right? They'd want to treat it as an idol, and maybe that's why maybe God took care of that. There's no indication that Vespasian or Titus went after Christians or persecuted Christians by and large. Now, there are some things that happened during the other time periods. For instance, when Claudius is reigning in 41 to 54, um, he drove the Christians from Rome because of their conflict with the Jews. And so this is, you see, he reigns from 41 to 54. And so if you look at Acts chapter 18 and verse 2, Paul is on his journey. Because he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome, and he came to them. And so um, we see that during the reign of Claudius, that Jews or the Christians that were in Rome were expelled from the city; they were forced to leave. And so Paul encounters two of those that were forced to leave Rome. And so, like I said, Nero persecuted some of the Christians, but as crazy as he was, he never said, you need to worship me. Domitian was different. He was the brother of Titus. He was never in the military. And so here's Domitian, who's risen up to be the emperor of Rome. He's the leader of the Roman legions, if you will, but he's never been in the military. He demanded that people refer to him as Lord God and worship him as emperor. That Dominus et Deus, master and God, is how he demanded that people refer to him as far as his title goes. So he demanded that they refer to him as a god. People would have to offer incense, right? They'd have to go to he built tons of statues of himself. Vanity certainly wasn't an issue. He built a bunch of statues to himself all over the place to make it convenient for people to worship him and to be able to burn incense to his statue, right? And so if they didn't do that, then they would say, well, you're not loyal to the emperor, right? And that's one of the problems that the Christians are going to have, is that these other groups, yeah, they believe in different gods, but they accept other pagan groups. They don't say, no, we're the only one, right? They accept all these other pagan gods. And so they don't have a problem burning some incense to the emperor and saying, oh, he's Lord and God. But the Christians aren't going to do that. Christians aren't going to say, yeah, your God's is important, right? Or your God is true. And they're not going to do that. They're not going to burn incense to the emperor, right? Those that are true Christians. And so that's going to create some conflict there between them and the Romans. Domitian didn't start out this way, but he had a favorite sister whom he loved, not in a good way. And when she died, he had her declared a goddess. Well, if she's a goddess and he's her brother, then he must be a god, right? And so then he begins all of this nonsense, if you will. But as I said, Domitian is considered to be another Nero or a reincarnated Nero. Um, the church fathers that are writing about this, they like the later date because they say, well, it's really dealing with Domitian and it's not dealing with Nero. And I would agree with them. The book isn't dealing with Nero. The book's dealing with persecution that's going to happen under Domitian. But again, it's a book of prophecy, and what's there in chapter 17, verse 10, makes me think that it's written somewhere during the reign of Vespasian. So why is the book written? Well, we talked about that a little bit. It's to give the church courage and motivation to be faithful to the end, even unto death. In Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, if you are faithful unto death, right? Be faithful unto death, and you will receive the crown of life. And so the key isn't in preserving your life, your physical life, when the Roman Empire comes to persecute you. If your idea is, oh, I got to save my physical life at all costs, well, you're going to swear allegiance to, the emperor. You're going to burn some incense to him. You're going to do whatever it is that they want you to do, but you're going to lose your salvation, right? You're going to lose that crown, that victory crown, because who's going to be victorious in the end? Christians are. Christ is, right? Jesus is going to win. That's the book talks about how Jesus is going to be victorious, right? He's the one riding the horse with the name on his thigh, right? Lord of Lord, King of Kings, the Word of God. He's the one who's going to be victorious. And if you're on his side, well, you're going to win. But if you're on the other side, you're going to have a problem, right? You're going to be on the losing side. And so don't choose the losing side just for some physical comfort here in this life. Because Jacob has talked about it. If you had a piece of rope, your life here on earth might be this long, right? But that piece of rope stretches on, it never ends on either side. So it stretches on for eternity. So why have comfort here and pain for the rest of eternity, right? Just persevere and stick with it, because we're eventually going to win anyways. And so it's written to help them to see that they're on the winning side, to be faithful unto death. And there's good application for us today. Sometimes we might want to water down the things that Jesus says, because, boy, that's a hard saying. You start talking about marriage, divorce, remarriage. Boy, that's a hard saying. We need to maybe water that down so we can, because we're not going to gain any converts if we teach what Jesus taught on this. Well, we need to, just like they couldn't water it down, right? We can't water it down. And so there's application for us today to remain faithful unto death, right? And stick with Christianity, because the book, even though it's written about what's happening with the Roman Empire, there's a message, there's application that's in there for us, right? So he who has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. It's not meant just for them. It's also meant for us, to be a comfort to the faithful and to warn those who are negligent, right? Boy, if you're doing all this other stuff, if you're being identified with the beast of the sea, you got a problem. You better straighten that up before it's too late, right? So to warn those who are negligent that you're on the losing side. And so you see that the church is going to be victorious. His kingdom is going to be victorious. It's a kingdom that cannot be shaken in Hebrews chapter 12. It's a kingdom that cannot be shaken in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44. And so you see the ultimate defeat of Satan and his helpers. Because really, Satan is referred to as the dragon in the book of Revelation, and he recruits three helpers. He recruits the beast from the sea, the beast from the earth, and the harlot to help him do his bidding. But at the end of the book, you see all three of them are thrown into the lake of fire, and then Satan is bound. So he doesn't win, right? His side doesn't win. He loses. And so you see that Christ and his kingdom are indestructible in this. Look at chapter 1 of Revelation, verses 17 and 18. It says, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying to me, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am he who lives and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And I have the keys of Hades and of death. And so here's Jesus speaking to John. He says, don't be afraid. I'm the first and the last. I'm the one who lives. He's always going to live, right? He's never going to die. He's never going to be defeated. He's never going down in despair, right? He has the keys of Hades and of death. If you got the keys to something, I got the keys to a Mini Cooper out there. So that means that Mini Cooper is under my control, right? I've got authority over that Mini Cooper. He's got the keys to Hades and death. What does that mean? It means he's in control. He's in authority over those things, right? He's got the keys to that. So you see that his kingdom and Christ are never going to be defeated. They're never going to be destroyed. And then secondly, the key to victory is faithfulness, right? 2:10, be faithful unto death, and you'll receive the crown of life. Look over at chapter 12 and verse 11. I was talking here about the dragon and the beasts that are coming. And how do they overcome the dragon? It says they overcame him in chapter 12 and verse 11. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. How they overcome? By the blood of the Lamb. They were covered in the blood of Christ. They were Christians. Right? They had the word of the testimony. They believed in what it was that Jesus and his apostles and his prophets said. And they didn't love their lives to the death. They remained faithful, even though it required them to lose their physical lives. In chapter 17 and verse 14.
I heard something really interesting one time. There were a lot, I don't know how many Christians, but they were so frightened when they were asked to bow down, the emperor, that they just couldn't do it. I mean, they just were so scared. And then the church had the dilemma of whether to accept them back into the church because they had rejected
Yeah.
Christ at that point. And then they had the dilemma of could they repent and come back into the church? Can you imagine that dilemma? Because then a lot of people have gone out there and died. And I always thought that was interesting when I've been brave enough to have done it.
Yeah. Those folks that were weak, there was a great debate about that in the early centuries of the church about whether or not they should be accepted back in, right? That could they repent of that? And I think that you can repent of anything. God's grace is sufficient to cover any sin, right? But God doesn't want us to be weak, right? He doesn't want us to be cowards in the face of others, because a coward has no use in the Lord's army. Not going to tell anybody about Jesus because you're scared or you're afraid. Um, the cowardly are going to go off into that lake that burns with fire as well, right? And so we don't want to be scared, but yeah, it'd be difficult. And the difficult part would maybe not be so much ourselves, but when they put the sword to the throat of your spouse and they say, bow down to Caesar, or we're going to kill your wife. That makes it a little harder maybe than even if it's just yourself. In Revelation 17:14, he says, these will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Right? We are to be called. We're called by the gospel to obey what it is that God has given us. We're chosen, right? Not that we're predestined before we're born, but we're chosen because we're in Christ, that we're going to be his, and we're going to be the ones that are going to be saved and faithful. And so if we're going to be called and chosen, we've got to remain faithful. And so faithfulness is the key to victory there. Any comments or questions on these things? So the book's a book of victory. Talks about how the Christians are going to be victorious, and so you need to stick with it. I got 8 minutes. We're gonna try this. Numbers in the book. There are a lot of numbers that are in the book, and there's symbolism that is in the numbers that are used in the book. When we talk about apocalyptic language, or we talk about things that are written that are not meant to be taken literally, a lot of times the numbers are there because the numbers are symbolic of something, or the numbers are representing something, and they're not necessarily there to be taken literally, right? So when it talks about the 1,000 years in Revelation chapter 20, well, is that a literal 1,000 years? Because the church has been around for more than 1,000 years. It's showing us a time period that's complete. And so there's some symbolism, if you will, in the numbers. This symbolism used in numbers didn't start with the book of Revelation. This is something that was picked up. The Babylonians, by and large, had a lot of writings where they had numbers used symbolically. And so you think about the Babylonian culture. Well, how would the Babylonian culture influence? Well, because they spent 70 years in captivity in Babylon. They had to learn the language that was there, and they learned the customs, right, and the culture that was there. And so you've got Babylonia, and you've got probably the Sumerians also using various different symbols with numbers. And so you find this in the cuneiforms that have been discovered and broken down to see that they did this. And so in Jewish literature, you've got folks that are doing this, that are using numbers symbolically, not just in the biblical writing here in the book of Revelation, but in other writings of the time period, things that are in the Apocrypha, things that are in the Pseudepigrapha. They're using numbers symbolically in the other things that are written in this particular time period. So it was something that was common. And it's something that's common with the Oriental mind, maybe more so than the Western Greek mind. Right? We tend to think, we're in the Western Greek mind, we tend to think of, when there's a number, that number is meant to be taken literally, right? And when we have a story, we want the story to be told to us in chronological order, right? That's our Greek ordered Western mind. But these folks have a more Oriental mind. Now, when we think of Oriental, we tend to think of like China and Korea and Japan, right? Well, the fortune cookies always have lucky numbers that are so they're interested in numbers and numerology. But we tend to think Oriental, well, that's China, Japan, and Korea. But the Orient Express went from Paris, France to Istanbul. It didn't run to Beijing, right? So the Orient Express ran to Istanbul, which is in Turkey. So Asia Minor, the Middle East, the Near East, whatever you want to call it, that's considered part of the Orient, if you will. And they have a more Oriental mindset. And so it's a little different than how we tend to look at things. But the numbers in the Oriental mind would be used as symbolically to stand for things. And so can you think of a number that you see in the book of Revelation over and over and over again? 7. 7 is the most predominant number that's used in the book of Revelation. 7 is in the book of Revelation 54 times, right? 54 times. You got 7 letters that are being sent to 7 churches. Now, I don't know that the 7 there is symbolic, although maybe there's a reason why God picked 7 of them to send letters to, but there's 7 letters to 7 churches. There's 7 stars. There's 7 candlesticks. There's a lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns. There's 7 bowls of wrath. There are 7 diadems upon the 7-headed dragon. There's 7 heads on the sea beast. And so the number of 7 is all over the place in here. But the number of 7's all over the place in the Bible. How many days are there in a week? Why is that? Right? Completeness. There's 24 hours in a day, right? Can we explain why there's 24 hours in a day scientifically? Well, of course we can, because the Earth makes one rotation, right? And so the sun rises, the sun sets, 24 hours in a day. There's 365 and a quarter days in a year. Well, why is that? That's how long it takes the Earth to orbit all the way around the sun and come back to where it was, right? So there's 360, but there's no scientific reason for 7 days in a week, other than it's part of the creation, right? 7th day was a Sabbath day, right? It was a special day. It was a holy day. The 7th sabbatical year, you had sabbatical years. Every 7 years, you were to let the land rest, and you weren't to farm anything. You weren't to plant anything. It was a year of rest. And then after 7 of those sabbatical years, right? So after 7 sevens, then you had the 50th year, which was the year of Jubilee, which was another special event in the history of Israel. You got 7 weeks between Passover and Pentecost. It's 50 days, but there's 7 weeks in there from Saturday to Saturday. The Feast of Tabernacles lasts for 7 days. The Feast of Unleavened Bread after Passover lasts for 7 days. Walls of Jericho fell after 7 priests with 7 trumpets marched around them for 7 days, blowing their trumpets 7 times on the 7th day. There's a lot of 7s that are in there. And so you get the idea that 7's an important number, right, in the book. The next number of prominence is the number 12. And we'll talk about what the number 12 represents. But the numbers viewed symbolically, they stood for something. The number 1, right? There is, hear, O Israel, there is one God, right? The Lord your God is one, right? That's the idea of unity, right? Or the idea of independent existence. He's the one, right? He's the uncaused cause of everything that we see. But he has independent existence, right? Nothing had to cause him. And so one is a lot of times used to represent this idea of unity. The number 3 is God's number. Maybe because of the Godhead, right? You got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so the number 3 a lot of times was used to represent God. In the book of Revelation, you'll see that there's a time period of tribulation that talks about a 3.5-year period. 3.5. 3.5 is an incomplete number. Right? It's not long enough for people to complete the destruction of the church. It's a 3.5, right? And so the idea is that it's not a complete number. And so when you look at time, singular, times, and half a time, right? That's 3.5. How many months are there in a year? 12, right? 12 months. So if you had 3.5 years, how many months are in 3.5 years? You get 36 plus 6 is 42, right? You see, there's 42 months. Talking about the time of tribulation, 3.5 times and half a time, 42 months. Average month has how many days in it? 30, right? 30 is a good round number, right? So guess what you get when you multiply 30 times 42? 1,260 days. And you're going to see all 3 of those in the book of Revelation. You're going to see time, times, and half a times. You're going to see 3.5. You're going to see 42 months. You're going to see 1,260 days, all referring to the same thing. It's an incomplete time period where that persecution is not going to be able to wipe out God's people. It's not going to be able to wipe out God's kingdom because his kingdom's indestructible and God is indestructible. You got the number 4. Number 4 is considered to be man's number. You got 4 corners of the earth, right? You got the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. And so 4 is considered to be man's number. 5 and 10 are both considered to be complete. Now, we don't see a lot of 5s in the book of Revelation, but there's a lot of 10s or multiples of 10. You got a beast with 10 horns. Well, it's complete, right? It's complete in its authority. That beast has authority for a time period, right? For time, times, and half a time. It's got authority for that time period to be able to do what it's going to do, but it has complete power in the physical government because that beast has 10 horns. And so it's representing the power that's there. And that 10 is a number that means complete. And so 7 is the perfect number, right? Lucky 7, right? 7's the perfect number. 7 is also the combination of God and man. 3 and 4 equals 7. That's God and man together, right? Reconciled to one another. That's perfection. And so what's the number 6? Fall short. Fall short of that perfect number, right? So 6 is a number that falls short of the perfect number. To the Hebrews, the number 6 had a sinister meaning to it, right? So when you're saying, well, this beast has got a number assigned to him, and the number assigned to him is 666, what does that mean? It's not talking about, we'll break this down and figure out that it's Nero by the letters of his name. This guy's a 3-time loser, right? Falls short, right? Falls short, always is going to fall short, right? And it has a sinister meaning to it. And then 12, the number 12 represented God's organized religion. And so you see there's 12 tribes in the Old Testament. There's 12 apostles in the New Testament. There's 12 gates to the city of heaven. There's 12 stones that are the foundation of the city of heaven. And so 12 is representative of God's people. Whether in the Old Testament or whether in the New Testament, it's a representation of God's people. Comments or questions or snide remarks before we break for worship? I know I threw a lot at you today, but it's going to help us understand when we get to the other parts of the book. And so I wanted to get this as part of the introduction in here. Thank you.